War.
War.
Inicio de la guerra.
Death.
52 people were
and
killed.
100 people dead.
That's a second.
Russian soldiers have been killed in Ukraine.
Destruction.
Destruction.
Destroyed.
Buildings have been destroyed to ashes.
This is what some decisions can cause to mankind.
The graveyard.
And immediately throw thousands, if not millions, into suffering. My name is Joel Schmidt, a 20-year-old student who just wants to understand the world a little bit better. And I created this series, which will only focus on the people who conflicts affect the most. Civilians. Welcome to the Forgotten Front.
Nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat.
International law. This is what the Russian Federation has been doing to it for the last 2 years. An all-out war has breached out in Ukraine. Civilians have been paying the price more than anybody else, although there are clear casualties on both sides from a military aspect. The civilians in Ukraine have been suffering for now 2 years. One of these is my close friend Ilya, a 19-year-old student in Paris studying international relations. But who am I to introduce him? Let him speak for himself.
Hi, my name is Ilya. I'm currently studying international relations in Ilya, a free institute for international relations based in Paris. And so I accepted to give this interview because I think it's important to talk about Ukraine as a main geopolitical issue, not only for Ukraine, but of course for Europe. And so as a student in international relations, I think it's an important issue.
Thank you, Ilya. It has been almost 2 years since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. How has this affected your personal life and perhaps the life of your family?
Yeah, so I forgot to mention that I have Ukrainian backgrounds, so it really affected me and my family. I wasn't affected directly since I stayed in France while Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, 2022. My family suffered from this. My dad had to flee from Ukraine with his family. He fled to Moldova, Romania, and Bulgaria for legal issues. Then he moved with them to Canada. I have a relative who suffered in Mariupol. Right before the imminent invasion of Mariupol by Russian forces, she didn't have internet. She slept on the ground, and she even caught pneumonia. But she fled right the day before the invasion started. So she fled towards the center of Ukraine, then towards Poland, and then she came back in Ukraine.
With a 2-year war, with growing economic crisis around the world, with a famine possibly approaching in Africa, and with so many other geopolitical factors, many states have reconsidered their position. Populism has been rising. Nationalism as well. Where does this come from? Is it all linked to the war? Perhaps Ilya has a response to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we didn't mention other far-right movements, especially in Europe. But there's not only the far right that leans towards protectionist policies or towards concessions towards Russia. There's also the far left that actually emphasizes on neutrality and on peace negotiations while maintaining the status quo on the Ukrainian ground, on the military aspect, of course. And so, to come back to the far right, in France we have Marine Le Pen. In Germany we have the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland. Yet we do see that the far right in Europe isn't that strong, since in Poland previous elections actually overturned the former far-right government, which seemed actually to be the most lucid and the most honest ally of Ukraine, and yet they applied opportunism as part of their foreign policy.
Of course. We also see a shift in the consensus regarding the war, sadly, today. It has been nearly 2 years, and first of all, we saw many demonstrations in favor, many protests in favor of Ukraine. But today, many taxpayers are thinking that the aid that is sent to Ukraine is actually being done at their own detriment, that they are losing jobs, that they are losing money. Do you understand these concerns, and what will you tell them? Like, do you believe that these people are wrong when it comes to their opinion on the aid that is being sent to Ukraine, or is it understandable how they feel today about perhaps the money being cut?
Well, I feel that this movement is due to populist politicians who take facts for their own benefits and thus influence the population. So there are a lot of experts who tend to say that for the moment the Western sanctions against Russia are not working on the short term, but they do agree that these sanctions would appear on the long term. So it's really important to keep that in mind. And to answer to your question, well, of course, not all sanctions are very effective. That's true. Nevertheless, there are other factors that could explain high inflation, that could explain the decrease of the monetary power in the EU, for instance. And furthermore, let's say that we cut off all sanctions against Russia. Would it actually benefit European taxpayers? Since since Russia's invasion of Ukraine actually destabilizes still today international markets and thus taxpayers, not just in Europe but also on all continents.
So you believe it is really because of populism in the first place?
I think populism. I think populism influences the process of thinking in regards to sanctions and policies that countries need to take to support Ukraine. Now, of course, there are facts that should be taken into account, like the effectiveness of sanctions on the short term and or on the long term. But we shouldn't just cut off these sanctions.
Of course. Thank you. Now on a more Russian perspective, do you believe as a person with Ukrainian background that perhaps the West has failed in the past with its policy regarding Russia? Could this all have been avoided if perhaps the West would have done it differently in the past?
I think that the West failed. It's failed to develop an effective foreign policy towards Russia, in the sense that Russia, in my opinion, didn't want to honestly cooperate with Western countries. We saw that Vladimir Putin invaded Chechnya and Georgia in the 2000s. Then he invaded Crimea in 2014, and yet most of the policymakers of the time argued that we'll need as Europeans to establish a closer relation with Russia, which clearly didn't work. We see that Russia, throughout Putin's mandate, developed what's called doppelganger, which is a huge misinformation campaign to influence public opinion and lawmakers across Europe, and not just in Europe, but also in America. So I do believe that we failed because we weren't strong enough against Vladimir Putin's approach of international relations and his interests that are actually anti-European.